All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in this Open Security Summit mini summit session for January. We're joined by the information security architect of Siemens Gamesa, and he is no other, Louis Servin. So over to you, Luis.
Thank you very much, Alana. So this is me. Got it. Sorry for the message. So I was a software developer for over a decade. I then joined as a security consultant and then joined an automotive company. And I was the lead security architect. And among many other things that I did there, I introduced the application security verification standard as the policy for AppSec. At some point, the CISO there wanted the team I was working with to create a policy for application security. And then everyone in the team started like throwing their hat in the ring, very gladly giving requirements without any kind of rhythm, like whatever everyone knew. Some people knew networking better, some people knew administration better. Everyone was just throwing things in. And I was like, guys, ASVS is the way to go, not just our own thing. And the challenge was we needed to adapt ASVS to our corporate image, our fonts, our headers, our footers, our everything. And this is a little bit the story of how I did that, how I contributed that to the community, so that, and now I'm going to show you how you can do that so that you have a faster, easier way to get there in the future. And what I'm doing now in Siemens Gamesa, which is a renewable energy, we create wind turbines and wind farms, is introducing the same thing for our application security. So I'm still not in the place where I have set it as a policy, because I'm not in the IT cybersecurity department, but I am in dialogue with them and winning them over little by little. So the journey goes on, and it's really fascinating. So I'll touch briefly on ASVS, what it is, then on how to adopt and transform ASVS to suit your needs. And I'll leave you with what I'm working on right now, which is a lot more exciting than just taking ASVS. And it is, how do you give the requirements to the developers, to the teams when they need it, just the scope that they need when they need it, just-in-time requirements, and then verify it. And this is where it couples a little bit with what Tinis Cruz was presenting a few days back. So bear with me, let's get started with ASVS. I don't want to read everything on the slide. ASVS is an OWASP project. ASVS is probably the most important OWASP project, not the top 10. If you ask Jim Manico and Andrew van der Stock and everyone in OWASP, but it's not as well known as the top 10. It's not as catchy in the name as the top 10. So it provides you an application security standard for web apps and web services, and it helps you in the design, build, and verification phase of the product. And it will help serve different constituents. You have builders and architects on one side, and you have auditors or security reviewers, pen testers on the other side. And they both have the same statements that they have to prove or implement. And it is aligned with NIST, with PCI DSS, and with a couple of other standards. So its adoption does not contradict any of the other standards out there. And what OWASP tells you is you can use it as a metric. So this is the yardstick with which you assess the degree of trust. I'd rather call it assurance that can be placed in a given application. You can use it as guidance for your security developers, for security controls for your developers. As a security architect, I like to use it as a source of inspiration for looking for weak or missing controls so that I can do my threat models on top. And of course, during procurement, you can give it to a vendor and say, what do do out of all these things, right? Which is, I think, what Ben was telling that they're doing in the entertainment industry. And in case you don't know it, ASVS has requirements that cover the development lifecycle. So you have developments while in the building phase, developments while in deployment phase, and developments in the assurance and verification phases. And you have 3 levels of assurance. And then you say, okay, level 1 is acceptable for all these activities and is suitable for these activities in level 2. And you can see that dynamic application security testing is enough at level 1. Static is to be used at starting from level 2 and 3. And what this means is, and that's why I like the definition of software assurance better, is I want to know which level of confidence I can put in your system so that it works in the intended manner and is free from accidental or intentional vulnerabilities. So this is not my definition. This is the definition of software assurance by Carnegie Mellon from Nancy Mead and a group of other people that created even a master's degree on software assurance. So the mapping in OWASP basically tells you, you can customize it by your organization, by your project, and it would be level 0. If you're just automating and trying to get rid of the OWASP top 10, level 1 should be enough. Level 2 is what most applications should be doing. So citing Jim Manico, level 1 is the least you should be doing. Anything less than that is not responsible if you are on the internet, if you're internet facing. Level 2 is what most applications should be doing, and level 3 should be reserved to high value, high assurance, or high safety assurance requirements. And the ASVS is split into 14 different chapters. So the first chapter has many requirements that are then more or less repeated verbatim on the other chapters. Why? Because this is where you're architecting and designing. So this is your quick checklist for things that should be part of the design, the most important requirements. And then you have authentication, session management, access control, validation, stored cryptography, error handling, data protection, communications, malicious code, business logic, files and resources, APIs, and configuration. So each one of these is a chapter, and all in all, I don't remember the exact number, but it comes to about 250, 280 requirements, if I'm not very wrong. With level 3. With level 1, it's about 180 or something. So it's not little what you get in requirements. And this is just one example from chapter 13, APIs and web services. And all requirements follow the same format. You have a chapter number, a subchapter, a section that deals with generic web service security. And within the section, you get a statement number, 1311, a description, verify that all application components use the same encodings, parsers to avoid parsing attacks that exploit different URI or file parsing behavior, which could be used in SSRF or RFI attacks. And it gives you checks on the different assurance levels that it applies to, which means if you're looking for assurance for level 1, you only have to take 13.1.1, 13.1.2, and 13.1.3, and you can ignore these ones. And the best thing is they are linked to CWEs, common weakness enumerations. This is nice, this is fine. You get the links to these things and you can go look the CWEs in the website. Unfortunately, on the markdown on the site, they are not linked. So you cannot jump from here to the CWE, which would be very practical, right? So that's something that annoyed me a little bit and I wanted to change. So I contributed a pull request that was not taken immediately because The Markdown is also parsed by tools, and they don't want to have the URI in the CWE, just the CWE number, because they already might have a mapping. So they might have to revert that. I still did it for the PDF, and I'll show you how that works. And it's part of the main release now. So starting from release 5.0, which is the next upcoming release, you will have PDFs that have hyperdynamic links to the CWEs, so that you can click on them and jump over there. So far, so good. Any comments, any questions? In case you didn't know it.
So, I mean, could you add another column to have link rather than it saying?
Oh, I can add, I added columns. When I was doing this in the automotive company, I added another column which pertained to NIST standards. And I added a second column which pertained to internal policies and controls, policies that were there. And we cited the statement in the other policy we were referring to.
I'm just thinking of those legacy passes. Obviously you'd want them L1, L3 up to a TWE, but if you had then link past that, you could then use that. But yeah, fine. If that's, but on the document itself, it'd be good to
I'm inserting the links anyways. So the vanilla Markdown from OWASP is still there. Now, when we go into the transformation phase, you will see I create new Markdown files that do have the link embedded.
Sure.
So there's a very fast transformation that happens in a second that creates this Markdown, which you could internally use as you see fit, because you know what you want it for, what you need it for.
Right. The only other question I had was, at the moment, what you're showing on that block has got no, it's just a section in each of the documents. But what I found when I was breaking ASVS down, that sometimes you have a chapter, which is, there's some narrative outside of that lower level, and then it's quite difficult to work out how that relates. So it's written as a narrative document, and it isn't necessarily always easy to break it down into those kind of individual sections.
I agree with you that I mean, for the requirements, the narrative is irrelevant.
Okay.
In my opinion. So for as a development team, I want to have this. The narrative around it, I don't really care for it.
Okay.
I mean, it's nice when I read the document once, but when I'm looking for the requirements for my current implementation, my current sprint, my current work item, I don't care about the narrative. I just want my 5 requirements.
Yeah.
At least that's how I see it, right? So just to cover all bases, this is the OWASP ASVS website, and you can have links here to different formats of it. And you have an OWASP ASVS Github repository, which is the source of truth.
Yeah.
So just for you to know, and I'll keep this open behind the scenes because we're going to work with it a little bit. So now we come to the interesting part. How to adapt it, transform it, and use it internally. So imagine you want to adopt ASVS for your company. Your company might have a corporate image. Your company might have requirements as to versioning control, as to a frontispiece or a first page or a control table that has to be there at the very beginning of the document. Your company might want you to refer to other policies. Hey, I don't like the standard narrative around OWASP. I need to transform that level thought 1 to 3 into my CIA requirements. I have levels 1 to 3 C, 1 to 3 I, 1 to 3 A. What does it mean to be in level 1 compared to our CIA levels? This is the description I make. This is how my company, the company I work for, interprets this. So we move away from OWASP and make it our companies, or me as a consultant, or whatever you want to use it. So how would the process to adopt ASVS look like? So you start by cloning the repository, right? So you go and fork OWASP ASVS, and then you basically pivot, add a new remote, and pivot into your own company's source code versioning solution. GitHub Enterprise, GitHub, a GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you're using, right? So now you have an upstream branch or an upstream remote, which is OWASP ASVS, and your own remote, which is, I don't know, I will call it GitLab. Now you have two. I would advise you to branch off of main so that you can keep track of incoming upstream changes in a separate branch. And then you can sync them. So how does that look like? Give me a second. So I have forked into this directory, home dev ASVS, and I'm in 5 git remote -v. Let me see if I have nothing personal there. And you can see I have an upstream, which is OWASP ASVS, and my origin, my GitHub account ASVS. So I forked off ASVS. I am working in ASVS, and I could show you another repository I have in which I have a third remote, which is the GitLab internal to my company, but I rather not. So it's the same exercise in the end. So basically I have one place where I merge everything, my computer, and I take from OWASP, I forked OWASP in my own private account. I pull from my private account, and then I merge from my private account into the branch for my company. So I called git branch, and you can see that I have master, which is coming from OWASP, and I have created a branch called Open Security Summit. And since I am working on the Makefile item in OWASP, I have an OWASP Makefile branch as well. But that's just me. You should have at least something like this. So you would be working off Open Security Summit, or your company. Let's call it your company. I'll call it Open Security Summit. And now the workflow is deceptively easy. You change the markdown files, you change the comments, the contents, you add columns to the tables. So let's do that. That's a great thing to do. So okay, before I get ahead of my head, we'll get to that. So you make changes to the markdown files, but it is very important. This is CC. You have to keep a reference to the original source. Delete everything you want, delete the contributors, do anything you want, but you have to keep a reference to OWASP, ASVS version, whatever number you cloned from. Now, you have changed the contents. Now you have to change the look and feel of it. That's why we have templates for that and document properties. So this second step will affect how your PDF or your Word file looks like. And the last step is to transform this markdown into one of several formats, or all of them, because this is where it gets very interesting for any other policy that you might be thinking of. You can change it into a PDF, JSON, XML, and docx, and you can add an ODT because Pandoc is working behind the scenes. So you can transform it into anything that Pandoc can handle. So if we look at the directory structure of the GitHub repository, you will see this folder structure. We have the legacy folders, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is current, and 5, which is next. I will be working off of 5 because this is where they decided to merge my change. And you will see that we have a Makefile, we have an instruction on how to compile, and we have templates, a Docker file, and a directory called EN for English. So choose the version you want to base off from. Again, 4 is the current one, 5 is the one that will be released hopefully this year. open the folder en, and you will find that the folders are, that the chapters are ordered sequentially. And you have a section called preamble and the frontispiece and I don't know whatnot. And then the requirements start with 0x10 and the appendices start from 0x90. So just looking at that, you can see that that's a snapshot from my VS Code. This is, I hope it's readable. Again, you have a header and you will see that's a YAML file. You have a frontispiece, a preface. You have using ASVS. So if using ASVS is the introduction where you have the image I had at the beginning and how to use the standard, what it means, yada, 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 using it in practice, case studies. I don't know, there's a lot of information here that is not relevant if you're implementing this in your own company, right? If this is my own company, I could start by saying, okay, I love this information for me, but my company doesn't care for it. So I could just go and delete it. So I go and delete that part. I could say, okay, that's enough for me. The frontispiece about the standard copyright. So maybe it's not version 4.x, but we can say this is version 1.0 based on OWASP, ASVS 4. No, this is 5.0. 5.0. Leading, did I write it correctly? No, leading edge. And yeah, if I can leave it like that, I'm not sure if I need all of these things. So I just remove that part. So you see, I'm just doing some random changes in the very beginning, which will be very easy to follow through, right? And I have the preface, and here we have a lot of what is new. But actually, if I'm introducing this is not something new, right? So I could just say, I don't know, I don't need the new things. I just need a preface, and I could do a query across the whole document and change application security verification standard for whatever name you want to give it. You change the name, you name it the AppSec policy of Acme or whatever, change the name, right? So I have made some modifications to the text. Because Ben suggested it, I will go and check in architecture, and I don't know. If we so want, we could add here another header called NIST, and just copy that thing here, and you will see now it's and I have introduced this throughout the table, right? So I have changed this table. I introduced a column called NIST, in which I could link to any NIST document that is relevant for this, or internal policy, or you name it, right? Now think only that you might need to do this change in every single table throughout the whole document. Seth is your friend. It's not difficult. Seth can do this in one go in a second or two. It's just a matter of getting it right after playing a little bit with it. I have done it in the past. But yeah, that's about it. Ben, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, no, it's just how you keep that up to date, because obviously, as you thought, you got, you know, it's
once you add another column here, you're doomed.
No.
So right. It will be very hard to, I mean, you would need to be very careful in how you merge, because you would need to look at the statements here to see if they changed versus that, because that one will not change, right?
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
It's not gonna be easy, to be honest. Sorry, my daughter was asking me to open some glue for doing some manual. Give me a second. Sorry, there are very important things to be glued together, and that's the way, right, with small children. So I have done some changes. I have saved my changes, I hope. But yeah, so if you want to change this column here, there be dragons. So it's going to be very hard to merge back. So now we have changed the contents. Now the contents fit whatever we want it to fit. Now we can start working with the document properties. So what are we going to do? I would say, let's change the title. Maybe you want to change the fonts. Maybe your corporate image calls for custom fonts. So I had that in my previous company. It was such a big company that they even had their own Calibri-based font types that are not public. So I had to make them part of the thing so that it was compliant with all other policies. You want to change the headers and footers. You might want to change the image, the logo, design of the front page. You might want to add a section, all of that. So all of that is controlled in the properties. And there are basically 3 files you need to touch. So in templates, there is a header tech file. I don't have any tech thing here, but you can see here I have changed the format to AppSec standards. I'm not sure if that is visible here so well. Oops. So let me open the file with nvim. Nvim does it a little bit nicer. Nvim templates header tech. Oops. I already had it open. Sorry about that. And here we want to look at a couple of things. So we might want to have on the center the AppSec standard as a title, the document title in the center of the document, on the foot of the document on the center. We might want to have a small icon on one side or the other of the document. And we might want to have the page there, and we might also want to have on the header the name or the section or some other thing. So those are all parameters that you can control here, and the rest you can just leave it like that. So basically change the name here, change the image there. So how does the original look like? If I go back to this one here, templates. You can see that the title was Application Security Verification Standard, and that the logo that was being put there was the OWASP logo header. All right, so we have changed that to fit our Acme company. Now we want to open the JML header. And I'll explain you why there are so many headers here. So now we open the JML header. Edit English 0x00 header. So you will see that I have put here Acme Corp, Acme AppSec Standard. I have given it the version 1.1 because in my company, Acme, it is version 1.1, even though it is based on 5.0 from OWASP, right? But we have no history of these requirements. This is the first version I'm releasing. And then I'm saying, okay, for the only non-English character in the whole document, I need to install Japanese fonts because there's one A and another character from the Japanese hiraganas. And then we also have Deja Vu and Source Sans, which are fonts that we need to have to show the document. Here, you could change your fonts to match any you want. The only caveat is that the build environment, I'll come to that, needs to have them present, else it will not build. But we're gonna get there. And last but not least, in the Makefile, we might need to change the target name of the document. So I'll open the Makefile. And here there's a target name, and I want this one to be, oops. Acme AppSec policy. That's it, right? So I have changed the title, I have changed the name. Now, what do I do? Let's talk about what is going to happen next. So we're gonna create several different file formats from Markdown. The first one is PDF, the first two, and probably the most important for old guard policy and compliance departments is the PDF and the docx. And we're going to use pandoc coupled with LaTeX to create the PDF and pandoc alone to create the docx. Now, if you have ever worked with LaTeX, you know it's kind of a pain to work with LaTeX. It's very difficult to get it right. And preempting this, I created a Docker file which contains the whole build environment you want to have to create it without sweating it. It's not a small Docker image that is built, but it's a small, it's an easy thing to do. You run one command to build the container, it's in your machine, and you build it. If you have a container registry somewhere in the cloud, store it there, park it there, pull it for building the document, it builds in 5 seconds. And there is one script in the directory that transforms the Markdown into JSON, XML, and comma-separated values. And the way to create all of this is, instead of building shell scripts and I don't know what, is the Linux way. This is the way. Makefile. Why? I don't know, because that's the way we used to do things in the past. And I think Makefile works a lot better than custom build something shell script. It knows already everything that it needs to know. And there are different targets. By default, it makes all. And all is, it will create PDF, it will create docx, it will create 2 different versions of JSON and 1 XML. If you have ODT, so open document format, you might have an ODT template, and based on that template, you will have the document created on the template. You can have LaTeX files created if you so want to, and it will also create Markdown files as an intermediate step. So that could aid you into serving rather those files in the original ones if you want the hyperlinks to the CWEs then. So to make the story short, you build the image, you run the container, mounting whatever path to the repository you have, and wait 5 seconds and it's done. And this last step, sorry, it's only step 2. This last step, the building, can be automated. So if you make a change or accept a pull request, that triggers a new build of the document, a new version of the document. And this is something that you could add to GitHub Actions, to GitLab Runner, or to any other CI you might be using. So to make the story short, let's go and do it, right? So that's what we want to do. Did I save it? Oh, yes, I saved it. Okay, so the file is saved. So so I have created this Docker image a few weeks ago, as you can see. It's not a small image, and it resides only in my computer. Why? basically because I'm too lazy to keep a public image that I know will be outdated, which will be vulnerable to many things. And I don't want anyone to be complaining about it being too old. So I rather share the Docker file and let anyone build it and maintain it as they see fit. And if you don't know the command, you can go and check compiling, which gives you the instructions. So install the Docker daemon, create the Docker file, run the Docker file. So Docker run, oops, wrong directory. Docker run remove not interactive mount pwd as data. Almost did it wrong. Mount pwd as data. Was builder 1.0, and I think that's it. So it will start spitting a lot of output. Don't worry, everything's fine. So you can see it is generating here. You can see the changes here. It created a distribution directory and it created a build directory in my computer. Now it's done. See, it was very fast. So all the complexity has been hidden in the Docker container. You don't have to worry about it. And you have to change a couple of files. So if I look into this, you will see into the distribution list, you will see I have a policy document, comma separated value, a docx, a flat JSON, a JSON, a PDF, and an XML. So I need to move this out of WSL so that you can look at it. CP distribution Acme policy PDF to local. Okay, and inside the inside build en, you will see that the markdown files were recreated. So just to show you the difference on what I was discussing, Ben, you will see that it's the same files, but now these files have hyperlinks to the CWEs. So this is an intermediate step that was not required by the main project, which is kind of a waste product, which you can reuse internally to serve these requirements internally as you see fit, right? And now they have all the changed content. So it might solve your case, it might solve your problem. Maybe you need to do some changes, but it was necessary. Why? Because I wanted to create, God, there it is.
A manual.
Exactly. So this is local and there's Acme. So you can see that Acme now, so the original file was control home. No, the other one, control home, that one. So
yeah.
You can see the original one look like this, right? So that's the application security verification standard 4.0, bleeding edge, OWASP, copyright 2021, and a lot of things. Now, since I changed it, now it's Acme AppSec standard. I have here the year, and I'm not sure why the header is now looking so horrible. It was looking so beautiful in the previous iteration. So I actually tried this before we started, and you can see here I think I messed something in the header, but in the footer, but you see the idea. So you get here the changes, and what I wanted to show you is every single one of these CWEs is hyperlinked to the page. So if you get the PDF or if you get your internal markdown, or even if you get the JSON, it already includes the, now the JSON, I don't remember if the JSON includes the CWE, but you get hyperlinks. So for me, this was a necessary feature. I wanted to have it as a comfort feature, not to go and type manually the number, but just to be able to click on it and jump into Mitra's CWE definition for a given item. So my intercepting proxy is incredibly slow these last 2 days, so I'm sorry if it's taking some time to load. But this is how you can make it your own, right? So now you have changed it, but this opens the door to some very interesting development or possibilities into the future of security requirements and compliance to these requirements. So if you create a policy, why do you create a policy? Sometimes you have a lot of external regulations, PCI DSS, ISO 27000. If you're building hardware, ISA 62443. If you're building vehicles, ISO, I don't remember, 2766443 as well, I think. And I don't know, the Chinese cybersecurity law, and you have many things, right? So you have 1 through N different governance departments, teams. It depends on the size of your company, right? Reading this thing, interpreting that, curating them, and storing them in the graveyard. PDFs somewhere that hardly get touched, very hard to give feedback, very disconnected from the consumers, very difficult to get the requirements you need when you need them, and even more difficult to provide the demonstration of compliance and validate this demonstration of compliance. And then you have customers which demand this compliance. You have regulators, if you're in critical infrastructure, demanding this compliance. You might have audits, and it all turns around the product. And the product, you need to demonstrate that it's complying with any external regulation. And the bottlenecks we can identify here lay in this part on this corner, right? So here we have the bottlenecks. So the validation step, the demonstration of compliance, and this part, they're very difficult to demonstrate. They're very difficult to get right. So why is this so exciting? Because I took this first sentence from Denis's Cruz presentation earlier this week. Policy PDFs or Excel lists or even questionnaires don't scale.
Yeah.
Why? Because they are disconnected from real life. So either they are ignored completely until you get to a quality gate, and then people are like crazy because they didn't know they had to do it, and now it's impossible to do it, and they will lie or take a risk acceptance or whatever, because it's impossible to retrofit something that had to be done. On the other hand, the company I work for, someone did the analysis, and we have 29 different policy documents for building a windmill, wind turbine, sorry, not mill, turbine. For building a wind turbine, there are at least 29 different separate documents that need to be complied with, and they range in size from 4 pages to 100. There is honestly no way anyone will go and look through all 29 documents every single sprint. So if they're not collected beforehand, it's very hard to get them right. Or I mean, even within the ASVS, right? If you have 100 or 200 requirements for level 2, are you going to go through all 200 requirements completely for a scope of work that requires you to upload files? Probably not. It's not necessary. You need to be sure that you get the files right. And there are certain requirements in ASVS that deal only with file import. And then there might be different tools to demonstrate compliance. So one team might be serving you Excel sheets, whereas another team might be serving you platforms like OneTrust, for example, or whatever they're using, Jira or who knows. So the teams are at a crossroads because how do I demonstrate compliance? How do I keep track of my requirements? And the triggers for change for me are these two tenets, right? I need requirements that are easy to consume, and I need requirements that are easy to audit. This is my goal. This is what I want to achieve. Now, how do I make them easily to consume? Well, maybe my requirement, one sentence, if I look at the ASVS, this one sentence sometimes takes 3 or 4 different things that need to be implemented to comply with this one sentence. So I need to do some translation behind the sentence, verify that something, and the instructions I give to the developer, right? So this is very much in line with what Mario Platt is doing on Friday, and which I have been working also with him. And this creates a possibility of having different audiences, auditors, PM, developer. Each one gets exactly what they need, but it's all matched together. We want to integrate with a ticketing system, Jira, Azure DevOps board, whatever you're using, right? And the best would be to get just-in-time requirements. Just like the automotive industry has just-in-time delivery of the things they need when they need them at the factory, why can't we have just-in-time requirements? What do I need? And then I get it. And we also have long-lived requirements that have a scope wider than a single iteration, right? So you need to have a static source code analysis. You need to be running a dynamic source code analysis. Those are things that are not dependent on the single iteration. Now, if I am able to integrate with a ticketing system, demonstrating compliance becomes very easy, because now I have a commit or a ticket number, or both, or several commits, or several tickets that spread from one single item to define that. And I have a real-time view of compliance, or I can have it at least. So in short, what I'm telling about is, what I'm saying is, you can keep whatever you call your policy house, the place your policies live, as a PDF. You still have to maintain that, right? You cannot avoid it, because then you're not ISO 27000 compliant. Yeah. But the source is kept in Git, GitLab, whatever you want to use. And you produce the PDF for the document house from this content, and you produce JSON for your developers, or CSV for your auditors. And maybe there's a way to integrate a just-in-time requirements engine in between that allows you to get the requirements you need now and output through an API integration what you need in your ticketing system. So to close the presentation, what we have discussed is that ASVS adoption and adaption is a lot easier now than it was in the past. I know there's a small learning curve behind LaTeX, but actually you don't have to bother too much behind LaTeX. You have to change 2 lines, and the rest is just Markdown. We know ASVS is a best practice, so adopting it is great. And ASVS could be, if you see the potential in it, the entryway for doing policy compliance very differently in the future, easing the burden on both developers and auditors.
Luis, can I oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm done. So it's open for questions, please. Everyone, shoot.
A quick question. So you've got your 29 external standards you've got to comply with. So someone at your company will take those documents and then review those against ASVS and say, for this, to make sure we've got the evidence to meet this piece of this document's external standards, we've got to do the following things. And then you've created a custom document, which you say you could filter down so that people are doing the right thing. So you take your composite of the 29 different documents, you run that against ASVS and say at what level each of those should be taken and which.
No, I have different policies, right? So I could have different policies feeding one tool. So,
Yeah.
and this is the point in which I present a tool I see with potential, security knowledge framework. So I'm not sure if you know this one.
No.
If you don't, it's a great thing to know. So this is the security knowledge framework, SKF, developed by Glenn Tecate and his brother. I wish I knew the forename of the brother. But what this tool gives you, and this is the one I like to play a lot with, is to generate requirements. So imagine here you have your policies listed.
Yeah.
You want to be compliant with ASVS, that's web. Mobile ASVS, that's mobile.
Yeah.
ISA 62443 could be the next one. ISO 27001 could be the next one. Data privacy. So you can start inputting your policies, right? So you would have your policies created as code. So not compliance as code, but policy as code.
Yeah.
From the policy, you output JSON, which you input into this database, because there's a database behind this product.
Yeah.
You input that data into you fit this database with this data from ASVS or whatever policy, right? Because you have paved the way. Now you just have to replicate for this Markdown script to work. You just have to replicate the same format you have in Markdown for all other policies. Yes, I know there's a lot of burden doing that, but the price at the end of the rainbow is you get one tool like this one with very little integration effort to serve you exactly what you need for the assurance level that you need when you need it. So let's say I am doing, I don't know, what am I doing? Sanitization, encoding. I am taking input from my users.
Yeah.
So I want to know what I need to do if I have a form I am working on for this sprint. And this will tell me, okay, are you taking, do you want input validation requirements? Yes. Sanitization and sandboxing, no. Outputting user supplied input on the browser side, yes. Getting files from the local file system, yes. And are you using XML? No. Are you using functions that perform OS commands? Oh, yes, of course, I am using OS system, whatever.
Yeah.
Now I click on next and I say, okay, this is a running feature and and a running sprint, and I need to add requirements to that sprint, or I am starting a new sprint. Or you could call it, if it's long-lived, you could say this is an existing project or a new project, right? So the scope is a little bit different, but I don't know, bear with me. Let's say we create a new feature and we say this is form 443. And here we have form takes user input. What now? And I click on the button, and if the gods of the demo are with me, in a few seconds, I should have for this sprint or for this feature that I created, what was it, 443? I have 11 requirements. So I have the 11 requirements, and I can add to these requirements based on exactly what I need, right? And what is really nice about this is they have a copy of the CWE information, why I need this. They have sometimes, not for everyone, some way of checking this with code, so you can run it. And if you so much want, you can also enhance this with ASVS Gherkin requirements like Mario Platt is doing.
Yeah.
And right now, this tool is limited to CSV export. So what I'm working on and what I'm trying to get resources for in the company I work for is to
API.
To building on this tool to be able to integrate to Azure DevOps Board, Jira, or whatever else using the API of the other product, right? And then you basically serve these requirements to that project using, I don't know, a single sign-on or some other form of authentication that allows this one to write on my behalf on my DevOps board. And I see here, and then of course, from the central governance perspective, if you have a view, a read view on Jira, you can do what Dinis is doing.
With the graphs, yeah.
With graphs. So you know which team is doing what, with which requirements, when, or whether they don't have any requirements at all, right? Which is already a violation.
So then basically you have an evidence trail that says for each step, you've now got the evidence, and someone says, John did this, did read this, and then he's responded to it. So you've now got a check. You can have a heat map of whether you've actually, applied, or you've done a manual check of all the controls.
That's exactly the idea. So that's what I'm striving for. I haven't yet gotten the resources. I haven't yet started that path, but I have managed to convince a few stakeholders to start transforming their policies into GitLab repositories and enhancing the single line statement with Gherkin stories.
So then the other bit that's missing is the mapping, which is, this kind of graph, which is how you map to all the, so at the moment there's that CWE mapping, but there isn't the mapping backwards and forwards because, but no, that's really, really exciting, really good.
I think it's exciting, right? And this is something that everyone could potentially do in their own companies, because just by virtue of having your policy source in GitLab, anyone in the company can help you revise it. Anyone in the company with access to GitLab or GitHub can give you a pull request correcting a sentence that's not easily understood.
I guess the only other issue here, and you mentioned this before, which is how you keep upstream links. So say your original source is ASVS and there's a change, there's a typo, or there's a change. How do you make sure it's non-destructive, or you've got the forensic trail when it comes in?
I haven't solved that myself. So I don't know, a bit of sweat and tears, I suppose.
And you've also got kind of CI, if you're in a physical environment or a cloud environment, you've got Cloud Security Alliance, and you've got the Center for Internet Security's kind of physical change management, hardware and software inventory, software bill of materials stuff. But no, really exciting.
Sure. Hi, Josh.
Hey, Louis. Hey, Ben. How's it going?
Fine,
Good.
fine.
Excellent. Louis, I think we've spoken briefly over GitHub at some point, maybe. I don't think I've met you before, Ben. So
I think we
you.
haven't really met in person, but yeah, we
No.
have a couple of discussions.
Yeah. Really good presentation. Really, really interesting. I mean, we just for background, I don't know if everyone else knows, but I'm one of the project leaders on ASVS. I thought I'd duck in because I was curious to what Louis would be up to, because it's always interesting to see how people are using ASVS. And yeah, really interesting presentation. And we certainly encourage people to take ASVS and try and customize it for their particular use case. As Louis alluded to, we can't take in everything, unfortunately, into the main upstream ASVS, and so certainly, but building on it and finding ways to adapt it, especially adapting it dynamically, is certainly a good move. I mean, as you and one of the reasons why we can't make those changes sort of is because again, because of these parsing tools, and also to try and make sure that people can refresh from the upstream. I mean, one of the things I personally have been thinking about is about mappings, and I don't know if we bring mappings out to a different location altogether, and in that way try and keep the basic text the same, but then we have some sort of mappings where we have like all the other metadata that people might want. So, okay, which one of the OS top 10 is this? Which one of the proactive controls is mapped to? Which one of the CWEs is it mapped to? And that sort of takes it takes that metadata out of the main standard, and therefore we don't need to worry about sort of changing the format of the standard, but it also keeps that data somewhere nearby. So I don't know if that's
mappings are very subjective. So that's the thing is there are very few people that kind of page the whole of ASVS into their minds at one go. and try and keep it all together. So like I was saying, it's how do you make sure you can, without, if you look across ISO 27000, or you take CIS, or you take CSA, they aren't always directly one-to-one mappings. So how do you maintain that mapping? And then if you flip it around and reverse it, how do you make sure they're consistent? Because there's always a degree of subjectivity to this as to what's, Luis, you describe what's relevant to your company, and so you make a judgment on that. But it's and that's where an auditor or a policymaker would say this is our judgment, and then you got to question professionally what that judgment is. But from a point of view of ASVS, what would be really useful would be if it was created in a way that you could extract it as code very easily. I mean, because like I said, the narrative document is fine for a first read through, but how do you make sure that it's that structure is there, and you can, just as Luis has done here, you can keep that kind of updated coming out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge. As I think Luis said, we haven't got a good solution for the narrative aspects. I think the narrative aspects are useful in terms, the text that comes before certain requirements. I think it provides some useful background, and it's something that can be referred to afterwards. For everything else, the actual requirements themselves, I guess pulling it out in a more programmatic way. We've got JSON output, we've got CSV output, we've got various different ways of pulling it out. So that is there.
I'm just thinking of flipping the other way around, which is your primary, what Luis said is the primary controls are the numbered controls, which are in sections. So if that was the base level, and then you had a tag on each of those that said, look, this is the kind of next level of abstraction. Here's the labels, groupings we put together. Then you could also have a label that said, here's a block of text, which is your narrative document. You kind of reverse the way you construct the document instead of as it is at the moment, which is you kind of you sequentially go through and generate the document. If you had that as here's the database of the actual controls, just the controls, then you could have those associations in the mappings in a way that would be easier to still generate your current setup. So from a legacy point of view, people can still map to it, but what you're maintaining is your core data set.
So I guess you mean adding more tagging within the markdown itself?
Flipping
within having the original source of the requirements having more tagging, so it's easier to programmatically say, okay, well, this text belongs to this section, and this these requirements belong to this section.
Sorry, something different. Maybe I'm not being very clear, but if the bottom level of control is what you really want people to read and act on, and that's the thing you can evidence, if you made that as a very flat table, you've only got those things in. And then thinking of this as extra columns, if you then say, well, all these ones belong in this section here, then you've got your way of constructing your markdown. And then all you then need to do is have some more tags, which are the labels for the narrative. It means what you're maintaining now is the core controls. And then you can generate the same, I'm calling it legacy, your current way of publishing it, you could publish. But it would mean that'd be much easier from a machine to machine point of view to keep that linked and up to date, because you can do the version control that says change, and you can apply that version control downstream.
So so I see slightly where you're coming from now, I think. So how does narrative fit into that? Because I guess, do we have to then have a sort of a separate table of narratives that then maps to where there's a lookup from the main table of requirements that looks up on the table of narratives, so we know?
Yes, you've got a table of controls. And then you've got labels, and for every label, if there's a narrative that goes with it, and there may or may not be, because some sections don't have narrative, then you could just have that as an associated table. And then when you come to generate your current markdown for legacy, which is what you do, you just would pick up that label, and you then apply that in, you'd read that into the text. So you can still serially produce your markdown document. But what I'm saying is the core that you could access through an API would be the version control, last time stamped, updated base controls. And then if there's a change in the control, it'd be easy then to pull it through. But that also allows you then to have a series of mappings either at that group level or at a individual level. So, and because then it'd be really easy to kind of keep this web of controls updated.
So it's effectively maintaining it as the basic sort of the rawest form is going to be a set of tables, basically, which then can be combined to produce the other formats.
Yeah, so I don't know what you think, Luis, of that, but that would make it easier to link to. You don't have to do all the processing you've had to do.
Could be interesting. Dini suggested last summit a possible way to achieve that, but that basically requires every requirement to live in its own file so that it can have a header that is ignored when producing the nice looking output, but it's then linked to the section, to the subsection, to the text or whatever. I'm not sure if that's the way to go, to be honest. I mean, Pandoc and LaTeX could probably not complain about it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at is a real-time link, so that what we have in media entertainment is an ISAC where you've got vulnerabilities and you've got updates coming through all the time in real time. And so I think there are about 28 different ISACs in the US based on different utility companies. So for real-time vulnerabilities and changes, it means you could maintain those links. So you're making this much more about kind of real-time compliance.
Sure, I'm just not sure exactly how to fit this and create a document out of it. Would probably take some time of engineering to go through it and materialize this view.
Okay. I mean, what I'll do is I'll sketch something out. I mean, I'm not a programmer, but I can see very clearly what you showed. You said, I don't care about any of the narrative or any of the headings. All I care about is the controls and how they apply.
In a first instance, yes. I mean, the document itself is very, very good for understanding, and I recommend everyone to read it. But if I'm honest, no developer I know, and I give it to them, is going through the 200 pages of it, or
We're just
however
doing
many.
the one atomic thing they have to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think certainly, Ben, your idea does sort of speak a little bit to some of the thoughts we've had around this, as in, this is historically there's been a document and therefore it's been put in Markdown and everything sort of stemmed from that. But I think we're seeing that it's, as you say, it's not so much a document as it's a list of controls that have some metadata around them.
And it wouldn't change the fact that you can still produce exactly what you're producing today, because you generate it, and then so there's no disruption to everyone doing what they're doing at the moment, but it would mean you can have an API calling to that list, and that is then up to date. And so we talked about the table of the base controls. Then you've got your kind of labels and the narrative that goes with the label. And then if the last bit you had was the mappings, then you can have a table of current mappings, which would then, and that would then address that problem that you had to deal with your NIST mapping, Luis, which is you then be able to say, select whichever of these types you've got. You could have very easy to keep that up to date.
Sure. I mean, that's like this idea on steroids and brought very far away, right? So for me, the starting point is, I think this flow for creating policies has a lot of potential everywhere.
Agreed.
Because it basically turns on its head how policies are generated and consumed. Well, consumed maybe not, but generated today. And it makes it possible to have perfect auditability to every change in your policy, because you know exactly who did which change on which date.
Yeah.
Agreed. Right. So it's perfect auditability, SHA signed or SHA sum calculated of it. Yeah. So there's no way to falsify it. So that makes auditors very happy. Now, if you take this Markdown, which is not the usual way to consume policies, and generate a PDF out of it, you're the magician. You just took the bunny out of the hat, right? Now you sell everyone the bunny, but you can then have very fast cycles of review cycles for the policies, because you socialize them. You make them open to everyone in the company for reading, and everyone can fork and make a pull request. So it's not the way most policy
agreed.
people think, but you don't have to use Git for that. You can use the front end on your web browser and edit there. And in that sense, it's not very different from using Gmail or Yahoo Mail or whatever webmail you're using, right? Everyone knows how to do it. So you just type the statement and it's translated into something from which automatically a new version of the document is generated, because you have this Docker container running in your CI pipeline that every time that a pull request is merged, generates a new version.
Yeah, and that was the other question I had, which is about the process. So if you look at your pipeline, and there's a process that the developers have to follow, and so you talked about tickets they've got to do, but it's again a question of, do you make them do every check every time? Because that,
I mean, we're talking about two different things which rely on GitHub or something, right? So one is the policy creation thing, and that it requires this Docker thing and checks, and it is itself a pipeline, right? So we take that to the side. Now, if you get served a list of requirements and you can reference back to the original requirement, V15.1.1 or 14, there's 14 chapters, V14.1.1.
Yeah.
Now I have this document and I have implemented this requirement. I have implemented this requirement. So I have a Jira ticket that is linked to a commit number, and has someone who closed it with this commit number. Now the only thing I need to do is query this board. Who does the querying? It could be the team itself. So if you tag everything, cybersecurity requirement and the requirement number, you can create a list of requirements implemented by just looking at the tags cybersecurity requirement in the project.
And that's assuming perfect knowledge and applicability for every developer who's going to, because they're not just checking the boxes, but you have a forensics trail when something goes wrong to go and check it. But then the other bit here is about kind of your risk weighting, which is to say what the value of, what things you should or shouldn't be doing, because you can build a very stringent pipeline that says everything has to be checked off.
It depends on you, right? So I'm not so far yet. So if you give me a few months, I might tell you some experiences.
What you've done is great. Sorry, it's just ideas, more ideas, and really interesting, Josh, to hear about the where you are with ASVS. But I'll sketch out that idea and send it through. But it'd be really interesting because I've had the same conversations with the Cloud Security Alliance, which is all the major cloud platforms, and with the Center for Internet Security, and they've got their mappings and their kind of frameworks are working together. And what I blended this is with ASVS, but I didn't have the advantage of Luis's tool, so it was all manual cut and paste out of PDF, which is very painful. So really exciting to see what you've got to, and it's just a question of how you make that dynamic so it's up to date.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely an interesting direction. Are you familiar with the GitHub repository for ASVS?
Yeah. No, that's where I got it from originally. I struggled with getting the CSV stuff to work, so I ended up just dumping the PDF and chopping it out. So
okay, so what I suggest is, I think I don't know if someone's created an issue on the repository before about this, but I think it'd be worth creating an issue, just sort of sketching out your idea. Because that's probably the best way of sort of getting the active people to feedback on it, and then see where it goes. I think that would be the best place to capture the feedback. I can't promise that everything in there does get integrated or doesn't get integrated fast.
It's a wish list. It's a wish list, not a delivery. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it puts it on the map and it puts it on the radar, and means we can start thinking about getting good feedback as well. So building some consensus as well.
The CSV output had an issue which has been solved.
Right.
There were
this
two
was
different.
About 6 months ago, I looked at it last. So
okay, I know because it hit me as well. So I fixed it.
I thought it was just me being
someone
stupid.
else fixed it, and there were two different tools. Now there's only one tool that takes care of everything, which creates a memory model, in-memory model. It's a Python class, and it creates an in-memory model of the whole ASVS.
Oh, great.
And then from there, it's just dumped into JSON or CSV. So it's pretty straightforward.
Great. Well, no, really, really good presentation. Luis, I've sent you my contact details. I'm going to be on the call with Mario on Friday. It'd be great to catch up.
I'll try to be there. It clashes with the music school for my children, but I'll try to be there.
Okay. All right. And thanks, Josh. I'll add something onto GitHub.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. And thanks, Luis. Really interesting talk. Have a good day.
Thank you very much for attending.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.